three distinguished guests here. We've got Lana Van Marter from Neste, which is a producer. And we have Keith Sawyer from Avfuel, which is a supplier. And then we have Mark Maslich from Bombardier, who's an operator user of it. And so we want to hopefully educate you and make this interactive as possible. So please use Slido to ask as many questions. Or if you just want to interrupt us and yell whatever you want, like, isn't this just greenwashing? Or whatever you want to say, feel free to heckle us. On your table, you have a one-page sustainable aviation fuel for dummies. And we'll be talking about that a little more. So hopefully you take it. It's actually made with recycled paper. That's how green we actually are. Sort of outlooks as to what's happening out there. As we hear about Greta and 5 million youth marching, 500,000 up at ICAO, which made them stop at the General Assembly for an entire day. We are seeing an overwhelming movement, and so the question is, what do we do in business aviation to respond? And that's something that we've been working at as a coalition, and Mark will talk about that later on. But first off, incidentally, in the Neste commercial, was Alana's daughter was in that tidbit about caring about the youth of tomorrow. So it's very unusual for us to actually have a producer talk with us about Jet A, which is made from non-petroleum. So no further ado, Lana is going to talk to us a little bit.
This is just a disclaimer because we are a publicly traded company, and so nothing that I say today can be used for any investment purposes. So our purpose is to create a healthier planet for our children, and that is real for us. It's something that we live for every day. As a company, we also promise to help our customers reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20 million tons every year by 2030. Our journey so far, initially we are a fossil-based company. Now we have 50% of our products are renewables and still 50% fossil. We hope for that to improve as we move on as well. And this is just to give you an example of what can be done to transform the industry. These are our facilities. We have a facility in Finland, 2 of them, one in Rotterdam, one in Singapore, and another one being built for sustainable aviation fuel. So by 2022, we will be producing about 440 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel from our Singapore facility. Today, we actually produce 100,000 tons of sustainable aviation fuel available both in the United States and Europe, eventually also in Canada and other parts of the world. And my key message today is that sustainable aviation fuel is available right now as we speak, commercially available and sustainable. These are the different pathways. There are about 5 pathways. You have heard of the banana peel that was in the AirBP video. That is the Fischer-Tropsch method. We also have the HEFA method, which Neste uses, as well as World Energy and others that are producing it right now. However, it can also be produced from alcohol to jet, and all of these pathways are available and certified by ASTM 7566. If you all know that Jet A1 is under ASTM 1655. And all of these products that can be produced through these pathways can be mixed up to 50% with Jet A, after which it can be certified as Jet A 1655. So we believe that with all of these things we are hearing right now, and I've been sitting around here since this morning, sustainability is something that we live with every day, and it is something that will disrupt our industry in the near future. And I would just like to present a solution right now, which is actually possible as we speak, renewable jet fuel. Renewable jet fuel that we produce right now is 100% drop-in solution, as I said earlier, 50% blend. It is compatible with existing jet engines. I was talking with some folks, and not everyone is aware of this. It is drop-in. You don't need to do anything with the current aircrafts that you have. It is compatible. It is made from waste and residues, raw materials like used cooking oil, animal fat, industry waste, carinata oil, and I believe carinata is actually being produced here in Florida. It has high energy content and is already available in an industrial scale. It is also has the potential to reduce emissions like particulate matter, UHC, or unburned hydrocarbons, and sulfur. As I said earlier, it has a high energy density. What does it mean? You can actually have more passengers in an aircraft or more cargo given a particular route. And it can fly further for the same weight of fuel in the wing. So it is actually an improvement from the regular Jet A. It is easy to use. No additional investments or modifications are needed. It has excellent performance. We have actually tested about more than 1,000 flights with Lufthansa, and it actually showed a lower fuel consumption compared to conventional fossil jet fuel. What are the raw materials? For us, we actually have about 10 different raw materials can be used. And I want to emphasize that each of these raw materials is certified and by the ISCC, the International Sustainability Carbon Certification, and it can generate credits, for example, in California, to the low carbon fuel standard, and federally here in the US with the RFS, or renewable fuel standard, which means that actually this fuel will get a lower price in those areas. Right now, we know that it is of a higher price because it is not yet widely produced, but with the incentives that we have right now, and because it is certified, it can actually generate credit. These are just the sample of the raw materials that can be used, as I said, animal fat, fish fat, vegetable oils, used cooking oil, technical corn oil, which cannot be used for our food and animal food, and different kinds of other crops like rapeseed oil, soybeans, camelina, jatropha, carinata, some of which are actually produced in between the regular crops. As a company, we also do research, and almost every year we spend about 50 million just in research, and most of these are for raw materials. As we speak right now, we are actually trying to see what we can do with municipal solid waste. We know that, for example, Fulcrum, one of those that are building their plant right now, is using municipal solid waste to eventually produce sustainable aviation fuel. We are doing the same to see if we could actually use municipal solid waste for renewable jet fuel. Algae is another area, and different kinds of materials that are sustainable that can be used to produce sustainable aviation fuel. And we spend a lot of money and a lot of resources. We have about 1,000 people working in research and engineering. I am mentioning this, and we have a slide on this to show you just how much it takes to actually be able to be in front of this particular industry. We also cooperate with different research institutions around the world to do this. These are some of the areas, and one that may be worth mentioning also is we are also looking at the plastic waste that we have now. In fact, today our company just announced a collaboration with one of the biggest companies that actually will help us liquefy plastic waste and turn them back into fuel, so that we don't actually have to pull out fossil from the ground again, and at the same time solve the plastic problem. We also have partnerships. We partner with different folks right now. We have a partnership, for example, with AirBP, with Lufthansa. We have a memorandum of agreement with American Airlines, Alaska Airlines, and others. We also work with some airports like San Francisco International Airport, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, among others. And the challenge right now is with all this is in what condition do we leave this planet for the next generation? And sustainable aviation fuel is part of the solution.
So, Lana, when we talk about the certification process of your 60-40 blend that you're going to start bringing into San Francisco in Q2 next year, what is the carbon reduction per gallon that it's burnt?
It is up to 80% reduction. It could be from 60 up to 80%.
And why can't it be burned at 100% of the bio product that's there? Why do we have to blend it with petroleum?
The reason we have to blend it with petroleum jet, this is how the technical folks explained it to me. The current aircrafts that we have now are so used to the fossil fuel. And the seals that you have need aromatics. And the fuel that we have now is so clean, it doesn't have aromatics in them. So you actually have to blend it in the current fossil fuel so that the seals that you have in the aircraft would still expand for safety purposes. So for a while, it will still be a blend until maybe we have the next generation of aircraft that can actually be 100% can be used for 100% renewable fuels.
Okay. So with regard to the push in California bringing to San Francisco, why San Francisco? Why not New York or Florida or another state?
Yes, we are going to do that right now, as I mentioned earlier, because of the low carbon fuel standard in California, as well as the RFS, the renewable fuel standard federally. What it is sustainable aviation fuel now is more expensive than fossil fuel. So if we bring it to California, the incentive there would make it less expensive, to the point that it won't be equal to, but approach to the level of the price of fossil fuel, so that it will be more affordable for those who are able to use it, and they can get credits for it. It's an opt-in, it generates credit, but it does not generate obligation.
Right, so right now in California, for the neat product, is somewhere around $4.50 a gallon that you would receive as a credit for that. That's about right?
Yeah, I believe that's about right.
Okay. Keith, you can jump in any time since you know this stuff cold.
Yeah, the LCFS in California is running right now. It's based off of the diesel, and it's going to move forward into the jet piece without or with the obligation. But it's running $1.20 to $1.50 per gallon, and then you have the RIN, Renewable Identification Number, which is another 40 to 50 cents, again built off the diesel. And that really, if you take $2 off what we see or talk about as the 450 blend, then you're getting pretty close to parity, which right now is $1.80 to $2 a gallon on the West Coast.
So for the panel, what do you see is going to take for other states to mirror California?
Yeah, I believe there's another state now that is actually doing this, Oregon. There are several legislations that are on the table. For example, New York State has legislation on the table. Washington State tried it last year, the clean fuel standard. It didn't pass, but I believe there's another legislation on the table. Puget Sound, which also covers the Seattle area in Washington State, is about also to pass another legislation. I believe also New Mexico, Colorado, and other areas in the U.S. are trying to see what they can do to have a similar legislation that is effective in having a low carbon fuel standard credit for sustainable aviation fuel. The other area is BC in Canada, British Columbia. They're actually including jet fuel as well as marine fuel, and also depending, of course, on how the newly formed government at the federal level in Canada will happen. They're also trying to have a clean fuel standard that may include sustainable aviation fuel.
Yeah, and demand is key amongst operators as well. So the more people ask for it, the more people want it, the more we feel there could be mobilization at a government level to help support these kind of initiatives. Because without demand, it really kind of sets the stage for success.
So as we talk about megatrends and sustainable aviation fuel, obviously a key issue is why should we care as an industry? And a prime example of this was last Monday, the Labour Party, in building their platform in the UK, wanted to ban business aviation by 2025. And I think Alistair wrote an article about that, and The Guardian did an article as well, which was very interesting because it compared business aviation to the equivalent of 450,000 cars driving per year. And so the question is, when we're at 0.4 of 1% of the greenhouse gas emission, why are we being, pointed at? So Mark, if you want to grab the flanger and talk a little bit about why we should care, that'd be great.
Well, I think the short answer to that is that we're an easy target. From business jets, they symbolize wealth, and from a media perspective, it's a topic that polarizes very quickly. And we saw what happened in the UK. It's not a topic that sponsors or kind of provokes a debate around what's actually happening in our industry, what are the benefits of what we're doing on CO2. It immediately became business aviation shouldn't exist. If you're talking to somebody in the UK, they go from a corporate jet investor conference to we should be in a corporate jet recycling and decommissioning conference, which is obviously not where we want to go. I think there's the polarization effect coupled with really the industry's efforts have been within the industry, and now it's the right time to start bringing them to the forefront, but we have to have, if you pardon the pun, as heavy guns as the opposition. So I think over the past couple years, and this is timing is everything, we've been building up to a situation like this where, as part of the GAMA Environment Committee, we really took the reins on creating this kind of detailed plan that brings us to climate reduction across the industry. So all of the OEMs, all of the engine manufacturers that participate in GAMA in 2009 signed what we call the Business Aviation Commitment to Climate Change, where the bottom line is by 2050, we reduce our carbon emissions by half, and there are measurable goals to achieve this. No other industry, or very few industries, really have these measured goals that track themselves and continue to perform better year over year. Now, the GAMA Environment Committee decided that these 4 pillars, which are market-based measures, implementation of new technologies, so the engine manufacturers bring a lot to the table with that respect, and finally SAF, so sustainable aviation fuel, are those pillars. And I forgot performance approaches, so all of the ADS-B benefits that help operators reduce fuel consumption during key parts of the mission. So the Environment Committee made those 4 pillars really the way that it tracks their activity, and when we started deep diving into all of the 4 pillars, we realized SAF needed a little bit of a push to help adoption because operators were not taking it. It's not available on every field, and we said we need to help curb that trend, and this is a few years ago. So the first thing we set out to do was look at why. And why can't we do this now? We have fuel more and more available, and we have to stimulate demand. So I think the first reaction around the table was really about, well, the economics don't work. The demand isn't high enough, so the price is too high, and it's a non-starter. An aviation department will take out their credit card, take the cheapest fuel on the field, and kind of move on with their day. We kind of wanted to validate that premise, and when we started calling operators, and we did this through a third party, a lot of what they said is, even if all things being equal, I'm not sure that this is safe for my aircraft. Can I put it in? It's not in my AFM, which, to us was very shocking. So the whole Environment Committee, all the OEMs, all of the engine manufacturers pooled resources and did a kind of audit of, yes, in fact, it's not listed in the AFM. So we went ahead and did that project to get everybody to sign off to make sure that all of their customers and operators knew that it's safe. And we produced something that's called the Guide to the Use of Sustainable Aviation Fuel. So it's actually available on the Bombardier table, and it really details why it's safe. And so it really takes that concern away from pilots and from directors of maintenance. And if you want to pick one up and share it with your director of maintenance colleagues, I encourage you. If not, I encourage you to pick it up just because it's probably one of the only documents in the industry that's signed off by every OEM and every OEM's lawyer. So it might be worth something in a couple of years. And then finally, we started to grow this whole exercise of communicating and educating the world about alternative fuels. And that brings us to why we determined that as a coalition, which then grouped all of the operator associations, so NATA, NBAA, IBAC, EBAA, that demonstrating is king to educating. So we organized fly-in events. So this was really successful. We started in Van Nuys, we moved to eBase, we moved to NBAA. A lot of the OEMs really stepped up and flew all of their jets in on sustainable fuel, and leading up to NBAA, where everyone flew in and out, which was a tremendous success. And that now has to continue. The momentum is there in terms of educating the market that it's safe. Most of the OEMs, if not all, are using it in some shape or form on their fields through demo flights, and this is very positive, and operators see this, so they get a chance to interact with the fuel and with fuel experts day in and day out when aircraft are delivered or returned to service from a service center. But finally, we need to cross that last bridge of getting into the mainstream. So crossing that bridge from making sure our industry is educated to making sure the world knows that not only do we have these pillars of climate change that we're moving towards in an organized fashion, but that we have that momentum that we talked about from governments, from fuel providers, from really the whole quote-unquote ecosystem that brings you to that fuel purchase decision. So that's why we're very happy as a coalition to announce that we're going to have a summit in Washington next year to bring together all the key players to help bring this onto the mainstream. And I think the response to what's happened in the UK last week was a great indication that we do need to do more when it comes to mainstream. We do need to keep the momentum and keep kind of our foot on the gas, pardon the pun, within our own industry and within everyone who will listen. But at the same time, we need to break into the mainstream, and doing that through governments, through key regulators is the way to go.
Yeah, so what's interesting about, for example, the Van Nuys event, which was our first event, we thought we'd have 70 people show up. We had 170 people show up at it, and we, thanks to Michael at Embraer, Mark at Gulfstream, and David at your place called Bombardier, yeah, those guys. Anyway, they flew with the media on the flights. We did demo flights for them. They answered the questions, were the subject matter experts, and we also put on the flights people that were anti the airport itself. And they came off those flights being very pro the airport and now really asking for sustainable aviation fuel because they saw that as a great thing because everybody thinks that airports are polluters. So with that said, it would be March 24th in Washington, D.C. will be the event, and we'll be having it up on Capitol Hill, so we're very excited about that. But part of it is we still recognize that we have an education process. So my good friend Keith Sawyer is a good teacher, and he's going to help us learn more about sustainable aviation fuel.
Can you mic me? Thank you. Which one is it?
That's the green button.
Thank you to the associations, and thank you for Corporate Jet Investor for having us here. I'm going to walk us through the supply chain for SAF and how it will be integrated into the refined jet stream. I'm reminded in hearing the talks earlier today that all of the aircraft that we have featured in the room, or most of, not all of them, have two motors, two systems, two pilots. Just a whole series of redundancies are built into the manufacturing of an aircraft. However, in the one product that's not redundant in your aircraft is jet fuel. And it's really important that as a fuel supplier, we take the utmost care to make sure that that product is clean and bright when it gets into the aircraft and conforms to all the standards that we have. The company that I work for, Aviation Corporation out of Ann Arbor, is a fuel supplier and business services supplier to over 700 locations here in the United States and many more internationally. And Tim, I echo the thanks to the OEMs for their support for the various demonstration events that we've had with respect to SAF. So I'm going to talk a bit about the supply chain and some of the complexities that we have. It is largely focused on North America, notwithstanding many of the issues are applicable as we go forward. We're going to talk just a bit more about business aviation and SAF. I'll talk just a bit about the supply chain that we see, some of the challenges that we have, and the call to action that we as a supplier, we as a coalition need from you, our audience today, around the promotion and the requesting in your businesses on a call to action basis for sustainable aviation jet fuel. Why is it important? This chart and these slides will be available after the talk as we go forward. So I think it's really important to spend some time on this chart, which is attributed to ATAG, who are meeting as we speak in Europe. But the industry, on a collective basis, has done a great deal to improve and reduce the emissions against an emissions target of 2020, not changing them, and reducing them by 50% by 2050. A great deal is done about how you fly the aircraft, how you manufacture the aircraft, just a range of technical components. But the remaining gap closer is going to be the use and the consumption of sustainable alternative jet fuel as a drop-in fuel with refined jet in all of our markets and in all of our aircraft. So the goal of zero growth by 2050, when we're going to see a doubling of the fuel consumption overall in the world. The United States, for example, consumes about 28 billion gallons of jet fuel at its airports. 2% or less is business aviation. So our flights and our volumes are disproportionately short. However, as we heard today, there's 7,000 aircraft that are flying over the United States at any one time that are business aviation, as opposed to the 7,800 aircraft that are commercial. So we're disproportionately short, yet I think as an early adopter organization set, we can do a lot to promote SAF going forward. So SAF is really the game changer as far as closing the gap on emissions. So the business aviation community in 2009 structured carbon neutral growth by 2020, been achieved. Approved fuel efficiency by 2% by 2020, achieved. Reduced CO2 emissions by 50% by 2050, that's a stretch. And we're all going to have to do our part as consumers of the SAF to make sure that it's been done. But I would remind and compliment my colleagues here from Bombardier, is we are the only industry that have set our own goals, policing ourselves and doing our best around climate change. So as I say, the largest reduction in emissions is going to be through the adopting SAF. The SAF, so that for the use of those that are on the technical side, bullet number 3, it meets fully the ASTM 1655 standards on a global basis. There's a blending requirement when you take the synthetic component and you drop it into the refined jet, which is D7566. That is a very important and conforming element, but once you've achieved that, you in effect have jet. Lana from Neste talked about the brilliant work that they're doing with respect to the different feedstocks. We've got municipal wastes, we've got wood waste, we've got fatty oils and greases, we've got inedible corn and purpose-grown crops, which are all going to contribute to this. And then we have the incentive momentum, which is really building in California, Oregon, several other states, such as you mentioned, New York. I'll add Colorado into that mix, a really green state, and on the west coast of Canada. So, as I say, it's approved as a drop-in fuel and has been attended extensively, as indicated in the guide. It's approved by the FAA, the various European and international aviation associations, and the associations that you're all members of have adopted this and are promoting its use. My colleague Mark talked about the great work that Bombardier did in leading the association and putting forward the guide in association with the various industry groups. And I would really commend you all to get a copy over at the Bombardier booth there, or go to some of the Aviation Association websites where the guide is all there as well. So this is really an important chart for all of you to understand. On the left, my left, your left, is how CO2 emissions are emitted in the life cycle of a barrel of refined jet. So CO2 is produced at every stage in that model, from the shipping, the refining, the transportation, distribution at the airport with your trucks, and then the actual aircraft overall. When you look at the life cycle of sustainable alternative jet fuel, it's a closed loop. So in each instance, CO2 is being extracted from the atmosphere and ultimately through the use in the motor of the aircraft yields reductions of 50 to 70% on a drop-in basis. And that ranges based on the 50% approval for the Neste product, for example. The product that we use, which is inedible corn, alcohol to jet from Gevo, is also approved up to 50%. And then we have some others that are in the 30 and 40%. Notwithstanding, the message there is over the life cycle of that production, there is significant reductions. And I think this is really, really important when you look at the biosphere overall. So how does the jet fuel supply chain work today? We have 137 refineries. Well, maybe it's one less since the Philadelphia fire, but 137 refineries in the United States producing jet fuel, and we have 18 in Canada. The supply chain is quite simple. Crude oil arrives at a refinery. It is refined, and refineries need to make jet. Jet is typically 25% of a refinery's production. And it's typically targeted, you know, as close as they can be to airports where they can supply by pipeline. The transportation of the product goes by pipeline, goes by rail cars, or goes by ships or barges, okay, to intermediate terminals and storage depots, which we have a preponderance of in the United States and in Canada. Then, in our business aviation segment, unless you're buying at LAX or Atlanta or New York, it's typically transported by truck, okay, from a terminal as a product to the airport. SAF has to be blended by regulation off airport. So the blending of the airport of the new SAF product will happen right in this intermediate storage area, and that's one of the challenges that I'll talk about in just a bit. It gets to the fixed-based operator storage typically, where you're fueling, or the airport municipal storage. It goes into the refueler truck and ultimately into the aircraft. Okay, and there is no change as we go forward. So that's how the supply chain works today for about 90 to 95% of the business aviation deliveries that are made in North America, notwithstanding the great volumes that go directly from refineries in Los Angeles and in Northern California directly to airports by pipelines. So some of the challenges, there's no change for any of you with respect to the taxes that a fueling company such as Avfuel would charge you. You know, there are taxes as they go forward. I had a chart when we did the Van Nuys event that showed an invoice that one of our customers lifted. You know, it was redacted, of course, but there were 9 line items just for the taxes on that airport. Another element that I'll draw your attention to is there is no change to the exhaustive QC and certification processes that occur throughout the supply chain. Each time an element of the product moves along that supply chain that I talked about earlier, it is recertified. Okay? And as SAF is going into the aircraft, we're now providing C of A's to those aircraft operators if they wish it, attendant with the delivery of that fuel. So there's nothing really different to you as a consumer. The product will be called SAF on your invoice, on your bill of lading, and so on and so forth, and there's no difference in the taxation. No difference in the taxation. So the challenges, the ones that I've mentioned are the key challenges, but the key challenges for us as a fuel supplier is the blending of the product, where you take the neat and you blend it with the refined jet. We compliment our colleagues at Neste for their project on the West Coast, which will make blended product available for the marketplace at considerable investment that they're making in that as we go forward. But the most common ones that we see are customer knowledge, acceptance, and adoption, and that's why we're here today, which is to give you SAF 101, 201, and hopefully 301, and be able to answer any of your questions through the next couple of days. We've done some demonstrations, and we've proven the supply chain is viable, safe, and secure, and we're working to ensure over time, to the extent that we can, that the pricing through low carbon standards, RINs, scaled production will get closer to parity to the refined jet. And then we've got the regulatory hurdles and so forth. My colleague tells a story from Neste. In California, they would be just beginning to produce, just getting their permit for their facility that they wanted to build in California, yet they're still able to produce it from Singapore already because the permitting process is so much less elsewhere. So we have permitting issues and so forth that we must address. in our markets. So my company, we established an initiatives organization that I work for, specifically to deal with and position alternative fuel within our portfolio of offerings and to support the industry with its supply chain, the certification, and the investment that we're going to need. We talked about the guide, which again really gets you to 201 at a university level on SAF. We signed an agreement for the supply of the neat product with GEVO in June of 2018. And then we had the brilliant day on the 17th of January at Van Nuys, where we had over 160 demonstration flights use the SAF that we supplied that day. The next piece, of course, is we flew quite a few aircraft from North America and from Farmingdale, New York, and also from Farnborough in the UK into Geneva with 32,000 gallons, and we had. In addition, we had the 28 flights, as I say. We hosted an event at Jackson Hole in association with a big environmental set of announcements that they made, and that was very successful. And then we had the further demonstrations that we exercised for supply to NBAA in October. So advancing our call to action, and this is the collective leave behind. You know, what if I had you take one thing away? Well, it would be this chart. And we ask that this community, corporate jet investor, accelerate their use and requesting of SAF by expressive end user interest to people like me as a supplier and your other suppliers, which ultimately will generate the demand. We've worked very hard as an association and coalition to ensure that the commercial airlines don't leave us behind. Even though we're only 1.5% to 2% of the demand, we are flying a lot of aircraft and consuming a lot of fuel, and we have very, very high visibility. The last piece that I'll leave you with is the corporate flight departments. The other ones aren't as applicable, is the corporate flight departments. We're increasingly seeing requests from corporate flight departments as their companies link their use of their corporate aircraft to their sustainability metrics. Okay? Cox Communications, a classic example in Atlanta, DuPont, Chevron, Starbucks, Microsoft, all have sustainability metrics, and their sustainability metrics attribute to how much more value they are as companies by their shareholders. So sustainability metrics and the incorporation of SAF into corporate flight department use is going to be key as we go forward. So I can't say enough that, you know, we can talk all about it, but it's going to be up to all of you to be just asking for it and promoting it and sponsoring it in your organizations. And the first group to thank are the OEMs. They've flown their aircraft on the product. We've been happy to test, rehearse. We know it can be done. We just have to create the momentum, build on the momentum to generate more demand so that we'll have this sustainability effort actualized well in advance of 2050. Thank you.
So as we look back to the question of the megatrends of why, I mean, who cares? Isn't this just greenwashing? We look at the airlines, they, do, 4 million gallons of SAF, and they're all green? I mean, isn't this a bunch of, as the other guy said earlier, BS?
No, absolutely not. This is part of a very measured plan to reduce our carbon emissions as an industry, and really from a greenwashing perspective, I think you can lump anyone accusing our industry of that into the camp of people who just want our industry to cease to exist as a whole. So this is kind of something that we need to all be on board with and know that there is measurable progress being made even today. Even today, SAF helps in terms of our carbon emissions. It helps us meet our goal, and it not only will help us achieve our 2050 goal, it's the path that can help us overachieve it as well. So it's a big, if I put a public affairs hat on and a communications hat on, in this case, saying the right thing is equivalent to doing the right thing, and it basically has to get done.
So I head up the National Air Transportation Association, and we have a ton of operators and FBOs and fuel suppliers and MROs as members. I see it actually as an existential threat. If that we don't adopt SAF, the media, public perception will kill business aviation if we're not careful. It's that serious right now. We're seeing this with the Flygskam in Sweden and elsewhere. That's just rippling. When I talk to my kids and my kids' friends, they all think that I work and support a bunch of polluters. And I explain to them, we're only 0.4 of 1%. You driving your car around is polluting more per year than, what are you doing about that? But it is this perception. Everybody talks about electricity, eVTOL. If you take a look at the environmental hazard of producing batteries and lithium, we're going to have an issue there too, because that will be the next thing. So if we adopt sustainable aviation fuel, we can actually fly with one of the pathways at negative carbon emission. At Revolution.Aero, a month or a half ago, or 2 months ago, out in San Francisco, Eric Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh's son, announced a challenge. And the challenge was simply this: a flight from New York to Paris, 0 carbon emission, with 4 people in there. Now, what I should have done right then, well, actually, what I did was, Alistair came over and we both started laughing. We just said, we can do it now. He should have said it had to be electric. And what we should have done is we should have raced over to Michelle or Michael and say, hey, can we borrow one of your jets right now? Let's go in there, let's go party and collect the $1 million or whatever it was and drop the mic when we show up in Paris. So we have planes. I'm preaching. I'm supposed to be a moderator. How's this working? This is not good.
Well, then I
Take
can
it
add
away,
to that.
but,
It's essentially, I think, over the course of the day, we've seen how business aviation really is one of the unsung heroes of globalization, of trade, of kind of moving the economy forward. But we have to move from being the unsung hero to more of a sung hero with a good story on how we're helping to reduce climate change, but also helping innovate. We are the industry that solves problems. Everything we've seen today is about how we're solving problems to move people from A to B in a more innovative and exceptional way, and that just has to make it to the mainstream and leave, the walls of our industry. And where we pat ourselves on the back a lot, we do it well. We're excellent at talking to one another at meeting and resolving these problems. We have to now kind of go beyond our walls as well.
So one thing that you all should be concerned about is that the World Economic Forum is coming up in Davos. And right now, there is no plan for any of those planes to fly over on sustainable aviation fuel or to do carbon offsets. So you should be concerned, because now we're going to be in the crosshairs, and we're working as a coalition now, as when we found out about a week ago, to try to come up with solutions, because otherwise we are going to be the problem, because there's going to be climate protesters there. There's another big climate worldwide protest that's going to happen in December, and we're going to be truly in the crosshairs, and we got to be proactive. We've been proactive so far. People have asked, well, why, Tim? Why do you care about this stuff? Well, when there isn't really a supply chain of SAF until sometime in next year. And the reason is that we have to educate. The fact that we talked with smart people that are operators and FBOs, and we had the word alternative in there. It was called sustainable alternative jet fuel. That word alternative freaked them out. So that's why industry-wide, we got rid of the word alternative and called it sustainable aviation fuel. It is Jet A. It is certified, fuel QC. If you got a problem, you can sue him. It's great. But another key component is understanding the certification of the carbon offset. So Lana, if you could talk more about how the certification to determine what the carbon offset is, that'd be great.
Yeah, what it is that all the feedstock that we use, they are certified from the time we collect them. They're certified from the time we collect them. For example, all the used cooking oil, the fish oil, the animal fat, the corn oil, all of those. And if we use, for example, carinata, jatropha oil, all of those are being certified from the farm, and they're sustainably produced, and as well as even how they are from the life cycle analysis, from the time they come from the farm, the time they are produced, to the time they are actually made into fuel and go into your aircrafts. They are certified. And so there are carbon credits that can be used, and these are all acceptable to all the certification agencies, may it be in the U.S. or Europe or in Canada.
So the point is that not all sustainable aviation fuel is equal. So it's important to know what the carbon reduction is of whatever you're buying. And so there should be a certification as to what that reduction is. And so, like we said, there's 5 pathways to 6 pathways coming up, but each pathway is different. One pathway that's not being commercially produced in any means literally has a 120% carbon reduction, which is incredible. So we've got some questions up here that we'll try to tackle. Could you go for the first one? Second one, is there enough bio-waste to replace all fossil-based aviation fuels in the future?
Yes, the first question is, what is the estimated premium price-wise for sustainable aviation fuel without the incentives? Well, that premium today is probably 2 to 2.5 times per gallon price for the SAF on a blended basis. So that's the realm that we're looking at. However, when you look at California and you look at potentially $1.80 to $2 a gallon combined incentives with the LCFS and the RIN, then I think you'll see over time at scale the price get closer to ex-tax, the parity with the jet that people are paying. Now remember that the airlines pay a different price typically than business aviation. That's just the nature of supply and demand and volume. Notwithstanding, parity over time, I think is certainly achievable. And the next question relates to scale. Yes, scale will yield an improvement, but right now we have only 2 or 3 plants underway that will be producing between 6 and 8 million gallons of the neat product, which is only going to be a drop in the bucket against the demand that we need at present. However, my view is by 2025, we'll be approaching 5 to 10% of the jet fuel that's consumed in North America could be and have an SAF component. Lana, I think you want to cover this next one.
Yeah, the other one that
On the
says, is there
feedstocks.
enough biomaterials that can actually be? Yes, that is why actually we are continuously researching as to the kind of material and bio waste that can be used. So there are, for Neste, we have about 10 that can be used right now. I know other companies like Fulcrum, Municipal Solid Waste. We're also looking into that. And we are looking into algae. We're looking into woody biomass. We are looking into all kinds of waste that can be used. And there would be enough of this waste to turn into fuel. And what it is also, it would reduce our landfills. And it would actually be it would help resolve not just the problem of sustainability in aviation, but also in how we manage our waste materials. So there will be more than enough.
So I want to thank our panel, and in particular, I want to thank the OEMs that are in the room. Without them, the coalition couldn't have gone forward and moved to try to create a voice. We're happy to talk with you about this as we sip sustainable aviation fuel during cocktails later today, because literally you can produce the cocktails and make SAF out of it. So with that said, thank you so much, and you survived an hour about sustainable aviation fuel, so thank you.